Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, we sit down with Republican State Representative Jeanne Ives, who is in the process of deciding whether to challenge Republican Governor Bruce Rauner in a primary election. We talk to Representative Ives, a former Rauner supporter, about how she lost faith in the governor, what changes she would make to Illinois' property and income taxes, how she would appeal to Chicago voters, and what reforms must be made to Illinois' pension system if the state ever wants to balance its budget. Then in 40 minutes, we attend a committee hearing in which Representative Martin Moylan discusses the details of his bill HB 4117, which would criminalize bump stocks on guns in the aftermath of the Las Vegas shooting massacre. Also commenting on the bill are Todd Vandermeide, a lobbyist with the NRA of Illinois, and Ed Sullivan with the Illinois State Rifle Association. Following that, in 1 hour and 20 minutes, we talk to Dr. Brent Clark, the executive director of the Illinois Association of School Administrators, about the process so far of implementing the state's new school funding formula and whether Illinois school districts are reaching their so-called adequacy targets. And finally, in 1 hour and 40 minutes, we attend a press conference at the University of Illinois at Chicago as State Attorney General Lisa Madigan and others discuss their push to override Governor Rauner's veto of the Student Loan Bill of Rights. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our Advisory Council members.
The Channel salutes our Advisory Council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Linda Brookhart, Executive Director of the State Universities Annuitants Association. Founded in 1971, the State Universities Annuitants Association is the only advocacy organization focusing solely on pension and health care benefits for the participants and beneficiaries within the state university's retirement system. We advocate for both active workers as well as retirees. The number of individuals are well over 200,000. As an association, we work hard to keep our members informed of possible changes in the law that may impact their pensions, their health care, and their general well-being. There is no other association working to keep individuals informed on issues that matter. This is the one reason we're also proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel. Its focus is to keep all Illinoisans informed of the issues that affect them, whether in state government or of significant changes in the private sector. The Illinois Channel's in-depth, unedited coverage of legislative events, policy discussions, interviews with lawmakers, university presidents, and business leaders keep you informed on the issues that affect your life and the future of Illinois. I'm Linda Brookhart with the State Universities Annuitants Association. I watch the Illinois Channel, and I hope you do too. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, we speak with State Representative Jeanne Ives about her disappointment with Bruce Rauner and why she is considering challenging him for the Republican nomination for governor. This runs about 40 minutes.
Jeanne Ives, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you for having me.
You and I have talked numerous times over the years about various issues, but lately you've been in the news a lot more, and it's being speculated that you may be running for governor against Republican Governor Bruce Rauner and challenging him for the Republican nomination. So let me just ask you, where are you in that decision-making process?
Well, we're exploring it. I have an entire team behind me that is looking at that race to challenge Governor Rauner in the Republican primary. And it probably seems a little bit daunting to most people. After all, he's a very wealthy businessman, can self-fund his campaign, and I don't have those kind of resources behind me right now. But what I do have behind me is I really believe the people of Illinois. And not just your typical grassroots activists that are just fired up about a tax increase or something like that. I think I've heard from a number of people from different constituencies that are just fed up with, the politicians in Springfield and what's happened to them. They've seen a 32% tax increase, and they now know that that money's going to something that many of them find reprehensible, which is abortion. So we have taxpayer-funded abortion. They've seen their money go to bail out Exelon, a $2.2 billion net income company, on the back of ratepayers. And they know that the income tax increase is also going to go to bail out Chicago and their teacher pensions. And meanwhile, they made promises that they can't keep. So there's a serious challenge that needs to be taken to the entire Springfield class of politicians. And unfortunately, Governor Rauner has somewhat become one of those folks. So yes, we are exploring running against Rauner in the Republican primary, and I've got a team behind us, me looking at what it takes to get that job done so we can make a credible challenge.
If you decided to run in that decision-making process, some would say, well, or ask, is she running to make a point, or would she be basing her decision,
Right.
Does she think she could actually win? Would you run if you thought you couldn't win, but you thought you could bring some issues to the fore? Or would you be running only if you thought there was a path to victory?
No, I'm not up for any sort of, mission just to raise hell around the state, so to speak. Although I do want to wake people up to the challenges that are facing us. I think there's a path to victory here in the state of Illinois. I think the political climate is so bad. You've seen an entire outrage from Cook County on their soda tax. People are kind of getting upset about what's happening with they're upset about their property taxes, and they're waking up to what's going on. And you've got an entirely different medium now with all the social media going out there, that it's much less complicated to run a campaign and target your voters and let them know what's going on. So we think there's a credible path. And for sure, I know in the Republican primary, he is going to have a race on his hands trying to defeat somebody like me, because he is universally rejected by Republicans around the state. He can't show up at places downstate. He's doing video announcements of everything, and he has been told, we don't want you to show up at our function. So the Republican constituency is completely upset with this man. So there's definitely a path to victory to winning in the primary. I also think that Illinoisans are fed up with what the Democrats have delivered to them. You just got a tax increase again, a bailout of Chicago. You've got the speculation of a new gas tax increase. You've had money siphoned off from municipalities. You've had, all sorts of bad things happen. Businesses fleeing the state. It's all on the backs of the Democrats. You haven't had a balanced budget since 2001. All at the hands of Mike Madigan. So people are aware of that. And what is the Democrat candidates promising? They're promising you more problems for business, so there are more regulations on business. They're already promising that. They're promising a progressive tax. They will not do anything on property taxes because they just gave Barrios a pass in Cook County, even though it's been known for years that his assessments are out of whack and that he's hurting the poor minority communities. So, look, voters are waking up. They're on to the Democrats, and I think they will soundly reject another billionaire like a J.B. Pritzker. So he cannot relate to the average Illinoisan.
It's always hard to judge how much does the average person follow Illinois politics. Mm-hmm. I mean, you and I, you're in the legislature. I'm covering it for some 20 years. And so the danger is that you talk too inside baseball, but what's the reality on the street?
Right.
A lot of people, as you've mentioned, I think are just feeling enormous pain in property taxes. They're being taxed out of their homes, out of their businesses. I would argue, not to editorialize, but just looking as assessing the situation. The only income tax, even with this increase, doesn't make the state non-competitive with surrounding states. But the property taxes do. Property taxes make it that I would say it's very hard to convince someone to bring their either stay in Illinois or bring a business into Illinois. Do you have any ideas on what you would do about some? Well, let me just ask, rather than ask a narrow question, let me, if you were elected governor, what kind of things would you want to do to get the state back to where it should be?
Okay, I'm going to take this in two parts. One,
Sure.
I kind of want to address your idea about us being relatively low as it goes for income taxes. That may be true, but when you add up the entire burden on all our excise taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, when you add that burden up, in some studies we are, have the highest tax burden per capita. So when you do that analysis and you compare it to other states, we just lost the Toyota plant. They're not coming to the state of Illinois. Foxconn moved just across the border in Wisconsin, right? We've lost, in the last 17 years, Indiana, that has less than half of our economic size, less than half, has produced 4 times as many jobs as the state of Illinois. We can't even compete with other entities around us that are not as diverse economically. So this is a disaster. I'm going to give you a little story here, though. I grew up in South Dakota, actually, in a very small farming town called Vermillion, South Dakota. It's the home of the University of South Dakota as well. And in the early 90s, I have 5 siblings. In the early 90s, 4 of us moved to Illinois for job opportunities, all in different areas. So I have a brother in Chicago, 1 in Lisle, 1 in Galesburg. My sister gave me a call 2 weeks ago, and she does real estate back in our hometown. She said, Jeannie, a couple called me up. They want to look at property, and they're from DuPage County, which is where I reside. I'm from Wheaton, which is in DuPage County. And so they drove 8.5 hours out to Vermillion, South Dakota, population 10,000, small farming community. And they looked at 7 houses and bought 1 that same day. And so my sister Sarah asked, well, what brings you here? Do you have a job? Do you have relatives? The couple said, we have never been to Vermillion in our life, but we cannot afford our property taxes, and we need an affordable place for our kids to go to college. So what do they get when they make that move? South Dakota has no state income tax. South Dakotans maybe pay 1/4 of the property taxes on similar property than we do in Illinois. They have a lower sales tax overall. So when you all add it all up, that's a real savings for that family, and they can't afford to stay in Illinois. What I think everybody else should understand too is, despite those low taxes, they do have paved roads in South Dakota. They have police, they have fire, they have schools. I mean, I graduated from public school in South Dakota and went on to West Point. So we are getting outcompeted every turn. And people aren't going to call their legislator and say, hey, I'm leaving the state unless you change things. People are just going to leave. And that's what's happening. We've had the highest out-migration in the last 3 years. We're bleeding population and businesses, and we can't afford it. So what would I do differently? That's a good question. First of all, I'd ask everybody to turn out. You have to completely turn over the Democrat legislature. You must get rid of Mike Madigan. He is stopping all the good economic policies that would come to fruition.
People will say that's very unlikely.
That's right. They will say that.
And in fact, I just recently interviewed Kent Redfield, who's professor emeritus, and for the people who may not have seen it, but he's been covering Illinois politics or studying Illinois politics. And I asked him, where is the Republican Party in Chicago? Why, after 70 years, does that city vote solidly Democratic, to where we have no competitive races there? Mm-hmm. And as people may or may not know, it's said that a Republican can't win statewide unless you get about 20% of the vote coming out of Cook County. And we look at Senator Bill Brady, who ran in 2010 against Governor Quinn.
Yeah.
Out of 102 counties, he carried 99 counties and lost the election. Could you carry? Are you
really
looking at that?
point.
And how would you appeal to those voters, maybe who have been voting Democratic all their life and maybe all their parents' lives? What's the appeal to get some of them to say, vote for me, give me a chance?
Well, here's the appeal. Even those in Cook County, like I said earlier, are tired of taxes. You had a massive revolt over a soda tax when their pockets are getting picked clean through the property taxes at probably 100-fold of what they would have paid in soda tax. But the whole idea that you can keep taxing these people and not have an effect on them is false. And fortunately, the Tribune has done a great job highlighting the problems with the property tax assessments. And really, it's a game. It's a game played against South Suburban Cook residents that are, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, more of the poor and minorities. They can't afford those property taxes. They have confiscatory rates. They're paying 25% effective tax rates in some cases, 40% effective tax rates on particular homes. You can't afford to do that. You're paying for your home. In 5 years, you're paying for your home again, simply on property taxes in some of these poor minority communities. You know what? Game over. We're going to go in there and tell them the story and tell them what needs to be done so that we can actually win that vote and win them to our side, because this has to change for everybody. It has to. And, this city's bankrupt. It's absolutely bankrupt. So I think part of the way that you win is you win by messaging. The other part, though, that I would do once I'm governor is I think nobody's really been a pit bull on taking on public corruption, which is rampant throughout the state. Not even Governor Rauner has really made that a signature issue. He's kind of left it on the back burner. I don't know why, but it's something that resonates with you if you're Republican or Democrat. Public corruption is a big problem in Illinois, and we need to tackle it. So the executive should do what the executive can. And if given a legislature, again, in the control of Mike Madigan, look, he's got specific responsibilities by the Constitution. Adopt a revenue number, send a balanced budget. If those aren't done, it's up to the executive to pretty much line item veto things, take the hard cuts, do what they can. You can to balance that budget. But it's also up to the governor to message really well and tell folks what's going on and be truthful.
So many questions. One,
yes, sure.
As far as when do you have a deadline by which you would make a decision? I guess there's going to be a certain, I'm not sure what the deadline is. At a certain point, you got to have signatures on to get yourself on the ballot. Mm-hmm. But from what I'm hearing, now, is it accurate to describe you as both a fiscal conservative and a social conservative? Is that how you describe yourself?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely accurate. I consider myself both a fiscal and social conservative. When I served on Wheaton City Council, though, it became very apparent, though, that to protect taxpayers, all the rules were made in Springfield. And so I came to Springfield for the fiscal issues. Really, I came there to be the taxpayer's advocate against all the lobbyists and insiders that are down here trying to pick their pocket. So I didn't come down here for social issues, but I'm happy to be a social conservative. But I'm focused on the fiscal issues. That's why I sit on the pension committee. That's why I sit on the labor and commerce committee. That's why I sit on government transparency. I pick the committees because I think that's where taxpayers need to be protected the most.
And I want to go back just to this decision of running for governor. Part of it is, can you raise enough money? In your own mind, can you win? I think you've already made the point. I'll just emphasize it. Governor Rauner obviously has an unlimited number of funds, seemingly, that he could spend on his own campaign.
Yeah, sure.
But it might be the same point I think you're making that we saw when Donald Trump ran against Hillary Clinton, that she outspent him by a large amount. But once people already make up their mind about someone, running more campaign commercials doesn't really bear much fruit. How much money, first of all, do you think you would have to run a campaign? Have you gotten to that number? And how is it, without giving, I mean, certain things you may not want to talk about just yet, but to the extent that you can, are you reaching out to potential donors? Is that part of the process to say, hey, can we raise enough money?
Yeah, fundraising is a huge part of running a successful campaign, unfortunately. But money provides you the vehicle to get your message out and connect with voters. That's just the truth of it. So, of course, you do have to have donors. I tell you what, in the past with my other campaigns, I've had just a number of small donors who have contributed to my campaigns. But now this is a step up. I'm not going to divulge the amount of money, but I'll tell you what, I honestly think Rauner could spend almost all of his fortune and not redeem his reputation. So he's got a challenge on his plate.
And how did it come about? Were you approached, or did you think to yourself, I ought to challenge him, and then you reached out? So question one, how did that work? And secondly, what was the straw that broke the camel's back in your estimation? I'm going to guess that you supported Governor Rauner when he first was elected. He seemed to be a conservative. He was a Republican, as you are. What was the process along the way? Where did he start going off the track as far as you're concerned?
Sure, I supported Governor Rauner in his election in 2014 in the general. And, you know, I was happy to stand by a lot of his turnaround points because they were necessary. But he started coming off the rails when he forgot to keep messaging to people and demanding the reform that needed to happen. So that's part of it. He never really took the message to the people. You've got to convince the people of where this state is headed in the depths of our problem. We are bankrupt beyond all get out. We are an outlier in terms of our economics. We're not just middle of the pack on any measure of economics. We are way out. And that's affecting our flexibility to do everything, to take care of the disability community, to actually provide for education so that we can take off some of that burden with property taxes. We have zero flexibility anymore, and he never sold that program. But honestly, he's done some stuff that just makes no sense when it comes to protecting taxpayers. And I've mentioned a few of those, like the Exelon bailout bill. Terrible idea. The education bill that passed. One week it was great, the other week it wasn't. So, I mean, I came to this decision. I did not like the way that he was approaching things to begin with, but really, I guess when he signed a brand new entitlement program that no other governor in the entire United States had signed into law, when he signed that legislation that allowed for taxpayer funding of abortion, when the state is bankrupt, we are bankrupt. There's no way that you should start, I don't care what the entitlement program is, a new program like this when we're bankrupt. That was the last straw for many people in my party. And they basically started drafting me. They started drafting me. Somebody started a Facebook page. Somebody even put up petitions, not knowing you had to have a lieutenant governor on that list too. I got started being invited to things statewide. People wanted to draft me to run against him because they want a challenger to him. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
I was going to say, how did you first react when you heard that? Were you like, are you serious? Or how did it strike you?
I feel like people who know me and have watched my work probably understand that I am really trying to do the right thing for taxpayers. And I think that they knew that I actually have a backbone and that I will stand in the gap and make the argument that needs to be made and that I won't be swayed. So I think that they were looking for somebody who was principled, is my point. So I think that's why they actually were looking at me. There were other people that were looking at it too. It's a big challenge though. So this is a team effort. I got a call from a couple key people that look, Rauner is dead man walking. He's not going to win in 2018. We need another alternative. Republicans should take him out of office instead of Democrats. Jeanne, you should run. So I got a number of those types of calls from people that I respect. So it just started forming that way, and we said, well, why don't we just explore this and see what we can do? It's a big challenge. We're trying to gather the resources to make sure, and that includes the right team to put it in place. And we're still at that stage. We're not too worried about getting petitions done, but we know it does have to happen.
It takes what, 25,000?
No, it's like 10,000.
Is that right?
I think 5,000 is minimum.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I was thinking of an independent candidate.
No, yeah, I'm not an independent candidate.
So, and before we go into some other issues, people who may not have heard of you, you're from the Wheaton area, you're representative from that area, a suburb, western suburbs of Chicago. Just give us a bit of a thumbnail biography of who is Jeanne Ives.
Well, I'm a mother of 5. I guess that's how I define myself more than above everything, because the fruit of my labor for really the last 26 years have been my children. So I'm the mother of 5 children, but I did graduate from West Point with a Bachelor of Science in Economics, served in the Army for 6 years, including platoon leader and commander over in Germany for a transportation unit. And then I did ROTC at Wheaton College as an instructor there for my last assignment. I got out to raise my family, and I've done some tax and bookkeeping work along the way part-time, ran for Wheaton City Council, and then actually got asked to run for the state rep seat by somebody I respect, who knew where the game was played far better than I did, and I understood that once I got here. So that's kind of my background. My oldest son is serving in the Army. He's a U.S. Army officer, infantry officer up in Fort Wainwright, Alaska. He's Ranger tabbed. And my second son graduated also from West Point, and he's cross-commissioned to the Navy, and he's down in Corpus Christi. He's going to be a Navy pilot. I've got a third son at Ole Miss studying accounting, and I've got a junior at Wheaton Warrenville South, our public school in Wheaton, and then I've got a 8th grade daughter at St. Michael in school in Wheaton. So that's kind of my family. My husband does large utility construction projects around the Midwest. He's the director of project management for a big company that does that.
So it sounds like on one hand, your family in many ways probably profiles many other families.
I think we're the typical Illinoisan family, quite frankly. I really do. We're...
how middle-class families might look.
Right.
It looks wealthy from the outside, but you don't know how families are struggling just to maintain that lifestyle month by month.
Yeah, look, Christmas rolls off, and in January you're trying to find, $100 each for 3 kids to go into Park District baseball that is, parent-run coaching, and you're wondering, why am I spending $100 on baseball when the parents are the coaches? And you just can't figure out what government's doing with the money all the time, right? So you're putting your kids in school, and we did pay for private school because we wanted that choice. But even public school, there's lots of fees that go along with that. Property taxes are enormous. They keep climbing. And, we're very typical that way.
As you assess this, Illinois is predominantly a Democratic state. That's why the legislature right now is run by the Democrats. For 12 years before Bruce Rauner, the Democrats ran everything. Mm-hmm. If you were the nominee, people are obviously going to attack you, and probably on social issues.
Sure.
Well, they'll probably attack you on everything.
Yeah.
But what would you say to those mothers and fathers out there that go, on one hand, she sounds like us, but maybe they're pro-choice, and say, I don't know if I can support somebody who's pro-life?
Well, do you really want your tax money going to pay for abortion? I mean, that's the extent of the argument right now in the state of Illinois when it comes to being pro-choice, because the federal government has already weighed in on abortion. It's whether or not taxpayers should pay for it. And actually, when this was polled, well over the majority of taxpayers, and the poll was weighted towards Democrats, said no, we don't want taxpayer money paid for that. So the thing that should resonate with most people is that if we don't get back on track, it won't matter if you're pro-choice or pro-abortion. This state is going down, and your taxes are going to go up to pay for it. And the city of Chicago is bankrupt, even as they take on more debt and more debt. And they're going to ask for more money from you in the suburbs, and they're going to extract it through the income tax, and then they're going to send it to Chicago that doesn't educate its kids. That's what's going to happen. And I think that's the argument that needs to be made to people, that, you know what, aren't you concerned about, if you want to be pro-choice, how about the choice between choosing staying in the state of Illinois for your kids or having to go somewhere else? That's choice. That's the choices people are making.
How about, there have been votes, I think it might have been the temporary budget bill of a year ago.
Oh, yes.
And I think you were one of 4 people that voted no.
That's correct.
Which on one hand speaks to your backbone, that you are not afraid to buck the trend if you believe in something. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, people would say, we've just had Bruce Rauner, who had to be his way or the highway. We're concerned about having somebody who can't work with others.
Okay.
What would you say to that? I mean, would you be too stubborn that you couldn't bend a bit to work with people to get something passed particularly if it remains, as I would say as a political observer probably would at this point, remains a democratically controlled legislature?
Very good question. I'm sure that is something that people want to understand. So, you know, Governor Rauner basically hit Mike Madigan every single day. That was his nemesis. And there's no doubt that Mike Madigan has controlled the legislature with an iron fist. Nothing gets through his legislature without his approval. That's why you hire a governor, to be the backstop to the bad legislation. So you have to recognize that, look, Mr. Madigan, go ahead, do what you want, file those bills, pass them through. I'm going to stop the bad legislation that goes through. When it comes to a budget, hand me your budget, you know, and let's see where that goes. They have to produce a budget. That's what they have to do. And then the governor decides what to do with it at that point.
One of the knocks on Bruce Rauner is that he champions verbally a balanced budget, but that he never proposed one.
Well, that's true. That is true. So we would propose, obviously, a balanced budget. You know, we have enormous debt, too. We have $250 billion in debt. Every single taxpayer in the state of Illinois is on the hook right now for over $50,000 per taxpayer in debt. $50,000. People aren't going to stay here to pay that debt. They're going to leave the state of Illinois. So I'm not sure many of your listeners have heard about that. But as far as it goes with working with Democrats, I was the lead legislator on getting a reform through for the College of DuPage debacle. I was the lead legislator. I'll tell you what, Republicans rebuked that bill, stood up against my bill, and I'm a Republican. I had to get the Democrats to help me get that reform through. So I've worked with them in a number of ways. Just today, and I'm appalled by this action, but just today, my property tax task force language that I filed back in February was hijacked by the Democrats. They stole my task force language and passed it off as their own. Copied it. If I could have copyrighted my bill, I'd be suing them right now. Look, I went to West Point. You don't lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate those that do. They stole my work product today. That's what they did. So the Democrats even know when I have good legislation. They do. They just want to take the credit for it. And that's what they did today.
So you had mentioned you worked also on pensions as an issue. Mm-hmm. I'll share with people, I did my master's thesis back in 1993 on the coming collapse of publicly funded pensions. When we look at virtually any pension system across the United States and at the federal government level, they're underfunded because they always overpromise benefits and underfund them. And people say, well, if we had made the payments all along, no, you still would have had a problem because you're promising Rolls-Royce benefits on Volkswagen contributions.
That's right.
But that said, how do we balance a budget when the pensions continue to increase in the state of Illinois and we have a constitutional provision that says those cannot be diminished? The people back in 1970 that passed the Constitution bound the hands of future legislatures, which is always a bad idea, by writing in that provision that doesn't allow us to adjust our spending on a key provision. I think in about 2002, pensions were only 5% of the general revenue fund, and now they're about 25%. So they continue to crowd out the money that we tend to think would go for operating the state. Now we also have a constitutional amendment that says you can no longer rob the transportation funds to pay for education and other things.
Sure.
So how with these restrictions, have you thought about, is it possible to balance the budget unless you first get a constitutional amendment that undoes the diminishment clause that protects pensions?
We do need that constitutional amendment. We do need a provision where we can in the future diminish those. Everybody believes, though, that even if that amendment were in place, it would be prospectively. So you have to take this in steps. First of all, you need to immediately enact in the legislation a Tier 3. They just did a Tier 3, so now we need Tier 4 that really seriously says, We are ending public pensions in the state of Illinois. Everybody
And
will
you would
have
have
a
like a
401k
401k,
style.
right.
Everybody, new hires should have a 401k style. We already have this program with the State University Retirement Systems. People self-select this self-managed plan. It's been very successful. It can produce the similar level of benefits that pensions do as well, because you cannot take anything out of it. It's a great concept, and it's what we already tool. We have to stop the bleeding first. That is the first step. After that, you can look to other ways that you can offer buyouts for people for these pensions and buy them out. You can look to then finally amortize it. Until you've frozen them off, though, anytime you re-amortize this debt and you just push it off into the future, you're just pushing all that debt onto our kids, who are going to wake up one day and wonder what happened. And they're not going to stay in Illinois. They're going to leave Illinois as well. So the pension is a huge issue. Just a couple things, though, to consider. Last year, the Municipal Labor Fund of Chicago paid out nearly $1 billion, like $999 million.
And I'm sorry, what paid out?
This was the Municipal and Laborers Fund in Chicago.
Okay.
They only took in $99 million.
And they paid out $1 billion.
They paid out $1 billion. You can't do that. Teacher retirement system is our largest system. It's 38% funded. Even the TRS director said, essentially, once you are at 30% funded, you almost cannot recover. And pensioners are foolish to think that taxpayers are going to continue to fund these in the future. There will be a day of reckoning when the money is run out and we cannot afford it, and the courts are going to take over. And so that is what's going to happen. That's why I don't understand why these people that are on public pensions don't understand that the whole house of cards is going to come down, and they may not get what they think they deserve. They may have to take a haircut, just like you saw in Detroit. But I'll tell you what, on the opposite side, what's going on, since there is there's other municipalities that have problems right now and are bankrupt. The opposite side of this is that in the case of a default, the bondholders get held harmless, and only the pensioners and only services suffer. That's the wrong prescription. Yet that's what the Democrats already have put in place through special legislation they hid in the budget bill. They already put in place that type of legislation.
In the budget just passed?
In the budget bill that just passed. Yes, Michael Madigan snuck in a provision that essentially says bondholders, in the case of default, who have securitized streams of income from the state will be held harmless in the case of that default. And Chicago's already rebonded about $3 billion of debt to accommodate that. That's not good.
Not to argue a point, but I would say
this gets in the weeds really quickly.
People should understand. It's hard to imagine that the city of Chicago would go bankrupt, that the Chicago public schools would go bankrupt, and that while the state of Illinois can't legally go bankrupt, that it can suffer the pains of bankruptcy for all practical purposes. Places like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania went bankrupt. Vallejo, California, Orange County, California. There are places and governments where they have gone bankrupt. Detroit, which was once a powerhouse, economic powerhouse, brought to its knees. And Detroit might have been for some other reasons, I'm not sure of that, but these other places were into bankruptcy because of pensions. And when that happens, the recipients of those pension benefits do not get them. It doesn't really matter that there's a protection that says they can't be diminished. When you take the last dollar out of the pantry, so to speak, there's just no more. So that's the reality. There is an economic reality, and I think sometimes when we talk about the legalese of the diminishment clause of the Constitution, that doesn't put money in the system to pay the benefits.
Right. So no, I mean, this is kind of a very difficult subject for people to understand. First thing you need to know is that we do not have bankruptcy law in the state of Illinois. So there's no municipality that can technically go bankrupt because we don't allow it by law. It only means that you can hike and hike and hike property taxes, which is already happening in the city of Harvey, that was directed by a court to increase their property tax levy to pay for pensions. in the firefighter fund. So the courts have stepped in and said, look, you better hike property taxes to pay for this person's pension. Now these people, you know, they're retiring at age 50. In many cases, they have multi-million-dollar pensions. In the case of teachers, they get everything back in about 2 years on average. So they're getting 3% compounded COLAs. I don't know if that's the case for the firefighters in Harvey, but this is largely the case around the state. These pensions are very generous compared to the private sector, and the private sector is having to pay for them. So this is a big, deep issue that we have to confront. So you can stick your head in the sand, but the truth is that these contracts have to be negotiated. We are past that point. It's just that nobody's talking about it. And nobody wants, I don't want bankruptcy in the state of Illinois too. I don't want bankruptcy in Chicago. And when I say that they're bankrupt, I mean that technically they just keep on adding to the credit card and they can't pay their bills with the income coming in, okay? For anybody else in the state, that's pretty much bankrupt. If you're in your personal household, that's pretty much you're headed to bankruptcy. They have 8 times more debt than they have income coming into the city of Chicago. What is that, right? It's unsustainable. That's what that is. So this is a really difficult subject to talk about, but rational beings have to sit down and renegotiate many of these contracts. And you know what? Average Illinoisans are being gamed by the system. Right now there's a strike going on, and I apologize if I cannot remember what district it is, but I was reading the details of it, and they're essentially arguing over health care costs. And then in the bottom of the paragraph, they also do note that the entire cost of pensions is picked up by the taxpayers. So the teachers who are supposed to pay 9.4% pay nothing towards their own pension. The taxpayers pick up the whole amount. In 2/3 of the school districts around the state of Illinois, taxpayers pay all or a portion of the entire pension amount. These people aren't kicking in anything. They're not kicking in a 3% match to a 401k. They're not even kicking in a 6.2% Social Security max. Taxpayers are paying for it all. Who thinks that's fair? It's categorically not fair. We are being taken advantage of by unions who have set this system up and perpetuate that by threatening to strike. So time to get control of this, because it's just going to be like that couple who left DuPage County for South Dakota.
Jeanne Ives, I know it's been a long day for you, and
Yeah.
I could talk forever.
I know.
You're an interesting
Thank you.
person, but
Thanks.
we'll wrap it up here. And as always, we can hopefully follow up on some other issues. Good luck in your decision-making process, and we'll look forward to talking with you again.
Great. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Next, from Springfield, we attend a committee hearing in which Representative Martin Moylan discusses the details of his bill HB 4117, which would criminalize bump stocks on guns in the aftermath of the Las Vegas shooting massacre. Also commenting on the bill are Todd Vandermeide, a lobbyist with the NRA of Illinois, and Ed Sullivan with the Illinois State Rifle Association. This runs about 40 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Sims and members of the committee. Today I am presenting House Bill 4117. This legislation is in response to the horrific attack that took place in Las Vegas that cost the lives of 59 people. My measure does 2 things. First, it bans bump stocks and other trigger modification devices. The Las Vegas shooter outfitted many of his semi-automatic weapons with bump stocks. This device can turn legal firearms into illegal machine guns capable of shooting up to 800 rounds per minute. My measure also closes a dangerous loophole that currently allows individuals to purchase prepackaged explosives, including tannerite. The FBI has warned since 2013 about the dangers of tannerite being used by terrorists to create improvised explosive devices. The Las Vegas shooter possessed 50 pounds of tannerite. Under my legislation, individuals would have to possess a firearms owner identification card in order to purchase tannerite or any other prepackaged explosive. I would appreciate your support and would be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Todd Vandermeide on behalf of the National Rifle Association. The representative's bill does more than just deal with bump stocks. as it's amended to the criminal code that deals with machine guns, it talks about sells, manufactures, purchases, possesses, or carries. And then the definition is a trigger modification device means any part, combination of parts designed or intended to accelerate the rate of fire of a firearm. There's the operative point. Under this bill, if you are a concealed carry licensee and you put an aftermarket trigger in your carry Glock, you're now committing a Class II felony. If you're a competitive target shooter at the World Shooting Complex in Sparta and you change the trigger springs in your Krieghoff shotgun, you are now committing a Class II felony. You cannot, as a gunsmith, perform an action job on a revolver. That's a Class II felony. If you change the the trigger on your AR-15 to an aftermarket drop-in trigger, it's a Class II felony. You change the bolt carrier assembly, you change the buffer spring, you change the buffer assembly itself. All of those become Class II felonies. Most gunsmithing work that you do to a pistol to smooth the action out results in the firearm firing faster or cycling smoother. That is a Class II felony. This bill would essentially prohibit or outlaw, in a rough estimation, 50% of the firearms out in Illinois today. It would make it criminal out of the vast majority of the 2.2 million FOID card holders for mere possession. Doesn't matter that you have a carry license, that you've been vetted through fingerprints. Doesn't matter that you're a FOID card holder, that you get vetted with 360 background checks every year. None of that matters. So this may be a response to what took place in Las Vegas. The net result is criminalizing a lot of very common things that gun owners do to modify their guns to make them shoot better, to make them shoot more accurately. And it seems to be a gross overreaction to criminalize these actions. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, although we take no position on the tannerite. But it seems just that we're getting a little absurd here. I have a firearm owner's identification card. It's been firearm owner's identification card for my entire lifetime. However, we've now added switchblades, tasers, stun guns, and now it looks like we're going to be adding tannerite in quantities like that. So what is it that I just have to have a card in my pocket that says I'm not a criminal? Is that where we're going?
Thank you, Mr. Vandermeer. Mr. Sullivan, you want to chime in?
I've referenced the time, and you only wanted one opponent. I won't add to what. First off, Ed Sullivan. I represent Illinois State Rifle Association, a different entity than Mr. Vandermeer. I just wanted to bring up that while we fully agree with what was just said, there is a secondary bill out there that Representative Bart Wheeler, a member of the committee, has that would ban bump stocks. And so there's been a question of how does the other side meet us halfway. You have the Illinois State Rifle Association writing and helping promote a bill to ban a component of a gun. And so that's our offer to do something good, to do something that this committee has asked for in the past. And so I just wanted to bring that up. So House Bill 4120 is a bill that is now out there in the press as being supported by the Illinois State Rifle Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Representative Ford? No. Okay. Representative Gazzardi? Representative Wheeler? I had no takers.
Thank you, and thank you, Representative Moylan, for bringing this bill, and thank you to Todd and to Ed for coming and testifying. I appreciate the plug, too, for the bill, House Bill 4120. Todd, you had mentioned something that's very interesting. You said if Representative Moylan's bill passes, 50% of guns in possession or their modification would be banned because of this bill. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, I think that half of the gun owners in the state with one or more firearm that they own would be affected by this legislation. I can only think of 2 guns in my collection that haven't been modified in a way that would be affected by this bill.
Because of what you called gunsmithing, the modification.
From gunsmithing to aftermarket components to, this thing says anything that makes it fire faster. Right. So if you change the muzzle brake on a semi-auto firearm, or you add a compensator to a semi-automatic pistol, that changes the way it shoots. That means that that addition to the end of the barrel is a Class 2 felony under this.
You also described this bill as being a knee-jerk reaction to what happened in Vegas. Can you explain why you suggested that?
These bills were filed long before we had what I think any serious facts about what actually took place. It is now 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks later, and we know that the individual used a bump stock, one or more of them. I think when you have the time to look at the facts, and we still don't have all the facts because the timeline has altered a couple of times from the accounts that the police department has given us, that once you have all those facts, then I think it's time to sit down and look at policy. The National Rifle Association has said that there should be, ATF should look at the regulation of bump stocks. I think there's places to look at, and I think that there's a time to look at what we know based on facts, not emotion, not hearsay, not conjecture, and I think the best public policy is built around facts.
So you gave a great description as far as what these modifications, why gun owners use them. What's the sole purpose of a bump stock?
I think a bump stock is a novelty item that when you keep telling people they can't have certain things, they will try to find a workaround.
So if we were, let's say House Bill 4120 is passed, what percentage of guns or owners would have an effect on their gun ownership? What you said 50% if this bill passes. What would be, how many bump stocks are actually in the state of Illinois that would have to give up their possession for this novelty item?
Representative, I can give you a nationwide number. There's about 150,000 nationwide. I have no idea how to compensate that down to Illinois.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Moylan, would you like to
Yes,
respond?
I'd like to be clear about a couple things. Nothing in this bill prohibits aftermarket triggers. Nothing says you can't change your trigger. It only prohibits modification devices which accelerate the rate of fire of that of a machine gun, of a regular semi-automatic weapon into a machine gun. Law enforcement and military and other relevant individuals are not affected by this bill. This is not a knee-jerk reaction. This is what we do responsibly to protect our citizens. My measure is focused on modification devices and an explosive substance, not the firearm itself. So let's not stop all this knee-jerk scaring individuals what's going to actually not happen. This is what we do because of an event that happened, and we have to act to save lives. To say that it's too soon, when it's too soon? It's 3 weeks after the event. There was a Tribune editorial that had a calendar with X's marked on it for every day we didn't do something. Members of the legislature and leaders, it's upon us to act responsibly to pass common sense gun legislation. And I ask all of your support. I would like to pass this out of the House, out of the Senate, and have the governor sign it so we can say as the state of Illinois that we are the leaders. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Slaughter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Moylan, again, thank you for bringing this subject matter before us. I think everyone in the room understands the importance of discussing this. I'm trying to get a little bit of clarity, and this is for all of you up there, around the public policy discussion with bump stocks. So nationally, are there any other states that have banned bump stocks? Well, actually, can we back up just a half step to what they actually are? It's my understanding, this kind of came to light for me personally in regards to the horrific Las Vegas incident. It's my understanding it's a device that can be applied to a semi-automatic weapon, making it a fully automated weapon, but there's been a lot of questions about what bump stocks are, what they do. Can you tell us what exactly they are and how are they used? I know we want to dwell on the Las Vegas shooting, but outside of that, why and how are bump stocks used?
Who you asking?
Yeah, well, everybody, but
All right, Representative, I'll start. What a bump stock is, the most common one is a company called Slide Fire. And you replace the butt stock on, and it started with an AR-15, you replace the butt stock. You put the new stock on. What it does is it allows the firearm to cradle and slide back and forth. Instead of normally holding the rifle tight into your shoulder, this stock allows the firearm when you fire it and when it recoils, it slides back just a little bit. Then by holding slight pressure on the forearm of the firearm, you're pushing it back into place. You're not manipulating the trigger with your finger like that. The recoil from the firearm is forcing it in a shaking motion like that, and that's what gets the acceleration in its usage. That's what happens. You can accomplish the same thing with either a rubber band or putting your finger in a belt loop.
okay.
That's what a bump stock is.
Okay.
I got a definition. I'm going to give you our definition. Okay? The current law banning machine gun refers to trigger functions and prohibits weapons that fire more than one round per function of the trigger. Gun manufacturers have figured out a way around the law by creating devices that accelerate the rate at which a trigger is pulled. This bill would ban any type of device that allowed for such a workaround, with language specifically prohibiting the two current types of devices, bump stocks and gad stops. Bump stocks, the first type of modification device specifically banned by this bill, in which is commonly called a bump stock. Bump stocks function by using the natural recoil of the weapon to force rapid compensations of the trigger. The result is the weapon firing at a speed of a machine gun, which highly diminishes accuracy. The shooter in Las Vegas massacre had 12 rifles modified by these bump stops. Most shooters will not use a bump stop because it's unreliable at the target that they're shooting at. This individual modified semi-automatic weapons into automatic weapons, and it's our responsibility to stop this use of this device.
Okay, all right, thank you for...
It wasn't an automatic weapon. It was a semi-automatic weapon, firearm, that had a bump stock attached to it. They didn't modify the gun to become a full auto. Had they done that, that would be a whole different set of federal firearms regulations that they would have broken. That's why ATF said these devices were legal, because they didn't alter the internal trigger mechanism to where you hold the trigger and the trigger itself, and then the hammer follows the bolt every time, and it's multiple shots for a single pull of the trigger.
Let's be clear. They put this device on a semi-automatic weapon to make it an automatic weapon.
All right, thank you. Now, based on both of those definitions, you know, I could see how one would want to use a bump stock in the instance that maybe they were that there was a war, and then maybe in another sick, deranged incidents, maybe in regards to the Las Vegas shooting. But in what other case, how are folks from the state of Illinois and folks all across this country utilizing bump stocks? I mean, what are we using them for?
Well, they're not. This is the device that he used to kill as many people and wound as many people as he could. He took a device that's not commonly used and altered a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic weapon, thus increasing the rate of casualties.
Representative, so these things would not be used by law enforcement. They're not accurate. They're used on ranges for fun. They're used by bad people, and that's about it. No law enforcement is going to have a force policy that would allow the use of bump stocks. If you were in the military, you're going to have an automatic weapon that you can't have as an American citizen as it is. And so
Understood.
that's why the Illinois State Rifle Association has chosen to take the path of supporting a bump stock ban. The problem with the representative's ban that he has before you today is the unintended consequences of altering a trigger to advance the rate of fire in a competition. That's what we're talking about here, in which we have a disagreement about. But these bump stocks certainly advance the rate of fire, not to the fully automatic, but pretty close. And that's what we're talking about. That's why Representative Wheeler's bill is as simple. The device attached to a weapon that was used in a horrific crime, we want to ban those. But we don't want the unintended consequences.
Representative Moylan.
Mr. Chairman, yes. If I include an exemption for competition, would you support the bill?
Not with the current language. No, it's too broad.
Okay. So you see, we tried to make compromise where we get.
Okay, wait. One last.
Again.
One last question.
Yes, fire away.
And this has been very informative, at least for me personally, hopefully for the rest of the committee. Just one last question around the public policy aspect of this. Have any other states banned?
Massachusetts did something, I believe, a couple of weeks ago. That's the only one I'm aware of.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Marty, for the bill. Look, I'm voting for this, but I do think it sounds like you're raising a valid concern. So for Mr. Vandermeer and for Mr. Sullivan, couple questions, I guess. So you noted that effectively this could sweep up revolvers, other weaponsmithing, anything that modifies a trigger. For the edification of this committee, help me understand, is there something that you could do to a trigger or some other way by weaponsmithing that would increase the rate of fire in the to the level that a bump stock increases the rate of fire? Does that question make sense?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. The way you get certain firearms to fire faster is when you change the trigger up without going into the manufacturing of a machine gun. What you do is you shorten the throw on the trigger, the amount of distance it takes to activate it, and the amount of distance it takes to reset, and how all those internal components work. You can't get it up to a full auto. It's physically impossible. Right. The fastest gun in the world is a Colt single-action Army revolver. You know, like you used to see in the John Wayne movies? The fast guns can, because of the mechanical advantage with that revolver, I can show you a video where 4 shots sound like 1. 1, 2, 3, 4 is the way they fan it, just like you saw in the old John Wayne movies. That's all hand done. So you can't make a trigger fire as fast. What they did with a slide fire was they figured out a way to use the inertia and the recoil of a firearm to reset it faster. That's a mechanical advantage over this.
Yeah. So go ahead.
There are times when sometimes the magazines don't even keep up. There's a lot of technical stuff that goes into it, Representative, but no, you can't go that fast.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking the question, I guess, is that I understand your concern about the language being too broad and potentially sweeping up legal firearm owners, which I don't really think anybody wants. On the other hand, there is sort of a question about, is there a number? I don't know what it is, but a way that you could have this language say, rather than, anything that increases the rate of fire, any modification that increases the rate of fire to X rounds per second, X, I don't know guns like you know guns, an amount of momentum, an amount of inches, whatever the measurement is, that might be helpful. That'd be certainly something I'd be, willing to consider and look at in a way of not trying to sweep up the wrong people. But at the same time, if something that isn't a bump stock can effectively do the same thing as a bump stock, which could effectively lead to a shooter being able to do what happened in Las Vegas, yeah, I would say we're probably going to be interested in not having that out on the street. So that's if there's a measurement.
I understand, but the problem is it's a subjective measurement. And I give you this: you pick up an AR-15, you can get it to go 30 rounds a minute. I pick up the same AR-15, being a little bit more versed in shooting, I can make it go 60 rounds a minute. What's your baseline? I think you get to a subjective place that you just can't quantify, because the same gun in 2 different hands can operate differently. And you can change up the ammunition. You can do a whole bunch of stuff. you know, from titanium bolt carriers to whatever. This isn't, the bill before you isn't just about triggers. It isn't just about bump stocks. It's any part or combination of parts. And it doesn't apply only to semi-automatic firearms. It applied to a single-barrel shotgun. So that's why when people who don't know guns draft overly broad bills, this is what we end up with.
And I totally appreciate that. You know a heck of a lot more about guns than I do, and probably John Wayne movies too, because I was a Clint Eastwood guy. But my broader point is that there is probably something that would make this, I'm not going to presume to say more palatable to you, but more palatable to, you know, folks who, you know, don't agree with me on this stuff, but that also protects public safety in the way we're trying to protect. We're not going to solve it here, but there is something that gets within a range of approximation of an automatic weapon, something that doesn't go all the way to getting at legal gun owners, but at the same time does ban this behavior. So I'll stop talking, but it would just be a suggestion.
I understand that the NRA doesn't support bans on, you know, a lot of things. I will say that whatever Representative or former Representative Sullivan and Representative Wheeler worked on certainly has a much narrower definition to go at, you know, what was actually used and not.
Respectfully, Mr. Vandermeer, I appreciate that. What I'm saying is I don't think that's necessarily the right answer either, because if there is a series of modifications one can make that skirts federal law, skirts manufacturing regulations, et cetera, and has the same result, almost, and you noted it would only be almost, of creating an automatic weapon, that's still problematic. And I think that that's something we ought to be considering how to figure out, you know, not to have on the street. That's all I'm saying. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Wheeler.
I just want a clarification. I thought it was already, the modifications that are addressed in this bill are not all of them aren't modifications to take a semi-automatic and make it an automatic. And it's already federally illegal to do that, correct? If you were to take your a rubber band or anything, any modification to a semi-automatic to a illegal automatic, it's already an illegal modification. Is that correct?
If it's an actual converting a semi-automatic firearm into a machine gun, that is already illegal under both state and federal law, and it is a 10-year federal felony. Under the federal law, under the ATF, you get charged for possession and for having a non-registered machine gun, a post-86 gun, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes along with it.
The modifications that are in this bill, though, I heard from my hunters and legal gun owners, the modifications in this bill, which don't have any effect from a semi to an automatic, whether it be in hunting or in competition, those modifications are being affected by this bill. This is why legal gun owners are having an issue. And then, Representative Moylan, you and I had a little bit of a conversation about this bill when you first filed it, because I understood the logic of, especially the logic of banning bump stock, especially since they're known as either a novelty item or an automatic deadly weapon. I mean, there is a clear, at least for me, understanding as to why we would ban such a novelty item. Right. But this expansion in your bill in regard to the modifications that you're addressing that don't take a semi-automatic and create an automatic that actually have a result to our hunters and to our people who are in competition, and then you throw in tannerite? No, really? Where are you going? It just seems so expansive and such an overreach. When you say work with us, when I reached out to you and I said, no, let's narrow this down and address the issue that really was the issue in Las Vegas that came to light, as Representative Slaughter said, we didn't really know about them prior to this. Now we know way too much more than we would like to. Why expand it so much?
Well, wait, Representative, we're not talking about legal modifications. We're talking about bump stocks and altering the way that the guns are used. And what do you mean throwing tannerite? Tannerite is a compound that when you shoot it, it explodes.
No, so, I understand that, but the whole issue
and we're not expanding anything. We're just saying that when you alter a gun, a semi-automatic gun, to a automatic by use of a bump stop, we're saying that should be banned.
And that's House Bill 4120. Your bill goes through all sorts of modifications.
Representative Wheeler, let him answer the question. Let him answer the question, please.
We're not banning tannerite. We just didn't throw it in. We're saying that you have to have a FOIA card to purchase it.
Okay, let's.
Okay.
Yes, all right. You're asking for a FOIA card for tannerite. Why?
Correct.
Why in this bill? I think we addressed it last
Well,
session
because the guy used the mass shooter had 50 pounds of tannerite.
And did he have a FOIA card? Or was he legally able to buy guns not just in the state of Nevada but elsewhere?
Well, here.
So what would have been prevented there?
Well, if we would have banned bump stocks before he went mentally insane, he wouldn't have had bump stocks. And if we would have had him have a FOIA card to purchase tannerite, we could have tracked that. So you're saying that just because my bill tries to protect people, I shouldn't do it? No, we have to act responsibly, Representative. Bump stocks alter a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic weapon
and
that can fire. Okay, well, but wait, we can fire 800 rounds per minute. Okay.
Agreed. You should ban those. I'll file a bill. Oh, I did. Okay. And it's simple. The rest of it, though, goes it's so overreach that you've completely muddied the water.
No, wait.
I will be voting no, not because I don't believe in the ban of bump stocks, but because I'm completely perplexed as to why you muddied the water in regard to what could have been a really good bill.
I take exception to you saying I didn't muddy the water. Nothing in this bill prohibits aftermarket triggers. Nothing in this bill says you can't change your trigger. All this is after bump stocks and tannerite. Come on, this is common sense legislation, Representative.
Apparently it's not, because the 50% of legal ownership is going to be effective.
Representative Wheeler, I think we've asked and answered this particular question. I think it's time to move on. Representative Ford.
Thank you. For the record, it's clear that if his bill only had the bump stock, you would support it. Whoever is opposed.
So the Illinois State Rifle Association is in support of House Bill 4120.
So if his bill just
if you want to take 4120's language and amend it, gut and replace it, put it on this bill, we'd be more than happy to do that.
And what is the other one? What's the other target that we're trying to?
Tannerite.
Tannerite. Do you have to have a FOIA card to purchase that?
No.
Okay.
So we're saying now that to purchase this explosive compound, you would have to have a FOIA card to purchase it. But also, 4120 doesn't ban trigger cranks, which are also dangerous, and turn illegal guns into machine guns. Let's be clear. Our bill is to stop the bump stocks and trigger devices that alter the way that they shoot into multiple shooting devices called almost like machine guns. That's what our bill is. Very basic. It's not an expansion of anything.
So bump stock is it manufactured as something that you could buy in the store? It may have been stated, but is this something that individuals do on their own, or you could go buy this in the store to add to your gun?
There are a couple of versions that are commercial products.
Okay. But if someone does it and they alter their gun, that's what the illegal part is. If the police catches a law-abiding citizen with
If you put machine gun internals onto an AR-15 or an AK or something else like that to make it function as a true machine gun, that's illegal. The bump stock does not alter the internals on the firing of the firearm. That's the difference. That's why ATF did not classify it as a machine gun. There's a difference there. So, but again, you know, the bill deals with any firearm, anything that makes it shoot faster. That goes to a single-barrel shotgun, a double-barreled shotgun, a revolver, a handgun. It's not limited to semi-automatic firearms.
And the last question, it's targeting the what did you say that was again? Tannerite. Why is that used, tannerite? Why do you use that? Is that used for the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine? Who uses that?
The shooters use it as a reactive target. So you're shooting long distances, you hit the target.
So no one really needs it unless a person is really a law-abiding gun
We take
carrier.
no position on it. You asked me a question, Representative. We don't take any position on the tannerite portion of the bill.
Oh, you don't. So you're okay with that?
Now, there was a bill last year, Senate Bill 315, that I think was Senator Morrison and Representative Conroy, and we did not oppose that bill.
Oh, so if this bill had just the two, bump stock and tenor right, you would not oppose it?
No, the National Rifle Association has said they were willing to consider regulations on the use of bump stocks. We have not been in favor of a ban on bump stocks.
But licensing an individual, you would.
How you get there's a different question for a different day, Representative.
I want to help. I mean, I'm not here I'm trying to see how we could get something accomplished. I'm not just asking a question just to be asking it. I mean, the goal is to try to get an agreement. That's what I want to do. I think that when I look at it, I am kind of concerned that a lot of law-abiding citizens may become felons. So I'm asking a question to try to help.
Well, this may be a case where Representative Sullivan's association and our association have a difference of opinions, but you know, the definition in Representative Wheeler's bill is much more tailored and narrow than what is presented in 4117. If there's a proposal on the table, I'll certainly take it back to my bosses at Virginia and have them review it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Ford. So let me make sure I understand a couple questions, Representative Moylan. Under your bill, the use of bump stocks and gat cranks would be banned. Is that correct? That's different than the language that's included in Representative Wheeler's bill.
Correct.
And then the use of tannerite would only be covered by someone who has a FOID card. So as long you have to have a FOID card to be in possession of tannerite. Is that correct?
To purchase it.
To purchase it. And what I just heard was that tannerite is typically used by shooters to identify long-range shots, and when shots have been made to targets. And when there's an explosion, the tannerite is typically used for that purpose. Is that right?
They generally shoot at tannerite to make it explode.
And you can only detonate tannerite by shooting it with a bullet.
No, that's not true.
Is that not?
There's other ways that you can initiate an
I see two different people shaking their heads. One saying yes, one saying no. What is that? Which one is right?
Well, tannerite is an explosive compound. There's two parts of it. When you mix it together, it becomes volatile. You can make that ignite by other devices other than a bullet.
Okay. Okay. So, in addition to that, I also heard, and this is what I think I just heard stated, that there may be a split between the NRA and the ISRA in terms of what the ultimate finished product might be. Is that what I just heard? So, if there are efforts, and Representative Moylan, who I know to be a very reasonable representative and a very reasonable man, if he would be open to having those discussions, there still may be opposition from at least the NRA. Is that correct? If there is a total ban on bump stocks, is that what I just heard?
That's the policy position that's been explained to me at this point, Representative. But if there's a new bill or new language, I certainly will take it back and have it reviewed.
Okay. All right. Representative Bryant.
Anyone can answer this question. Automatic weapons right now are regulated by the federal government. Is that correct?
And the state.
And the state.
They're
okay.
prohibited under state law. They are regulated under federal law.
They are regulated under federal law. Fully automatic weapons?
Yes.
Okay.
In 30 states, it is legal to own a full auto. In order to do so, you have to pay a $200 tax stamp for every one. You have to be fingerprinted and go through what's now about a 9-month background check with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Okay. And is there a proposal or conversation going on at the federal level right now to regulate bump stocks?
Yes. There's been a letter authored by several Illinois congressmen to have ATF take it up under review and review their regulations. And I believe there's been at least one bill introduced in Congress.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bryant. Seeing no further questions, Representative Moylan to close.
I just want to thank you, members of the committee. I think my bill is very clear. Bump stocks, tannerite. We're not trying to take away anybody's guns. It's just to protect our citizens and prevent and save as many lives as possible. And again, thank thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Representative. With that, the clerk will call the roll.
Sims.
Yes.
Cassidy. Stewart.
The bill before us today, no.
Bryant. Cabello. Gazzardi. Mitchell. Parkhurst. Slaughter. Stratton. Wheeler. Ford.
I have to say it's very important to me that you look at this closely and make sure that we are not going to lock up and make legal gun owners. So I'm voting yes, but I just hope that you will consider looking at that and doing the best you can.
With that, 7 members voting in favor, 5 members opposed. House Bill 4117 will be favorably reported to the House. Thank you, Representative.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Dr. Brent Clark, the Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Administrators, about the process so far of implementing the state's new school funding formula and whether Illinois school districts are reaching their so-called adequacy targets. This runs about 20 minutes.
Dr. Brent Clark, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. And last time we spoke, it was in the midst of trying to get the school funding formula passed, and we didn't know if the schools were going to be funded or not. Here we are in the end part of October. Fortunately, we do have a funding formula, and we wanted to follow up with you and see, now that we have that and we have the funding reforms, what is happening relative to the application and carrying out those reforms in school districts across the state. So can you just, first of all, let's start with that update.
Sure. So we've come a long way since mid-August when we last visited out in the lobby here at the ISA headquarters. As you know, the last few days of August, the House and the Senate both passed what's now known as Senate Bill 1947. The governor signed that on the 31st of August, and it's become the law of Illinois since then. The work now has started pretty strongly. You've got a couple tracks going. You have the State Board of Education who's going through the bill. They're verifying data, if you will, with districts because it's a completely different new formula, and they're looking at verifying enrollment data so that when they start funding schools with the new money. Now, schools are getting old money now, but when the new money starts to go out to schools, they're starting from what they believe will be a threshold of accurate data. So they're taking time this fall to do that. They've more or less told us or indicated to us that school districts would likely start to see a portion of their new money starting in January or sometime in early 2018. So then they would be getting all the new money between whatever that initial point is. Let's say it's January of 18, then by June 30th of 2018, their 17-18 money would come in that bucket. School districts today are receiving what we call old money, which is the base funding minimum. That's comprised of the state aid total that they received last fiscal year, plus their special education reimbursements, plus their bilingual reimbursements, all packaged together in what's called base funding minimums. They started receiving those in September. They caught them up from the month of August. They missed 2 payments in August. Those were caught up. Now we're on schedule getting 2 payments a month of base funding minimum. So as we roll into the next calendar year, which was halfway through the fiscal year for schools, you're going to see the base funding minimum continue, plus the new tier distribution, we call it, new money, start to hit school districts.
So one of the net effects of the funding formulation, as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, first of all, that there's going to be more money available for some of the what were the poorer schools, or some of the places where ag communities, as we say, where they didn't have a dense population and properties to tax, as well as some of those areas like, again, I always use East St. Louis as one famous example where the property values are low, and so those schools were underfunded typically. So am I right about that? And as you say, are they going to start receiving their monies? Would they start receiving more money under the new formula as early as January, or might that have to wait until the next fiscal year?
No, it would start in January. You have this broad spread between school districts functioning well beyond adequacy and those well below adequacy. So the school districts that function below adequacy, somewhere in the 40 to 90% range of adequacy, those are what we call Tier 1 and Tier 2 districts. They'll receive the lion's share of the new tier distribution money. That starts to flow, we believe, in January. So clearly the kinds of schools you described there, largely rural or high urban with low EAV, high population, those schools will most likely all be in Tier 1 and Tier 2, and they'll start to receive that new tier distribution money, should be in January, and they would receive the bulk of that between January and June. That would be their 17-18 new money. So that is expected to go, and then the Tier 3 and Tier 4 districts would also be receiving some new money. It would also come in the same time frame.
How would you describe, as administrators across the state are implementing these changes? It's probably always daunting when you have a new formula and you have the learning curve, right? But if you can, I'm asking you perhaps an unfair question. I'm asking you to speak for people at large. Yeah. Is the education community in Illinois, largely speaking, welcoming these changes, would you say, or what is the attitude now that we have this new funding?
There's an old saying here in Springfield, and I know this saying, and I've said it myself. You always bet on the nothing horse, and in this town, and 9 out of 10 times, you're going to be right with your bet on the nothing horse. And I think a lot of people, as they looked at the school funding battle that we went through in the spring and the summer, were thinking about that old advice and said, well, it's a valiant effort, but we're going to bet on the nothing horse, and 9 out of 10 times we're going to be right. Well, this is the one time that the nothing horse got beat, finally. And it got beat with a brand new funding formula and new money to go into it. So I would say a majority of our members were probably not spending too much time worried about the logistics and the mechanics of a brand new funding formula, because history would tell you for the last 47 years, nothing had changed. It had been pretty much stagnant, and there had been a lot of efforts only to fall short on the last pitch. I say that as a baseball analogy. It's a World Series time, but they'd swing and miss on the last pitch. The nothing horse would come running through and win the day. This time, we hit the last pitch, and we have a new funding formula, new money, and it's going to come to schools. So to get to your point, we've spent time just this past week or two. We've conducted what's called super region meetings, so roughly dividing our population into about thirds of the state, third in the south, third in the middle, and third in the north. We had super region meetings with superintendents and school business officials, and we went through about a 2-hour presentation on, I'd call it like a medium level of the evidence-based model, not a really high level, not a really low level, but just a medium level of what the evidence-based model is, how it works, what they can expect to be thinking about and learning about. And then we're going to come back in January, and we're going to hold a more intimate workshop in 11 different locations across the state where superintendents and school business officials can come to those smaller work groups and learn more about the evidence-based model and almost get to a district focus about what it means for their district. Then we're coming back in February, going to the same 11 locations, and coming back in with the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the federal law as it relates to accountability. Of course, Illinois has a role in that. We're coming back in February with a workshop on that. So attend the evidence-based model workshop in January, attend the accountability workshop in February, and then we're following that with March, doing 11 workshops in the same locations again for their third sequential workshop, so that they can start to tie together the funding, the spending plan, if you will, the new money, the accountability plan that's required by the federal government, and then how they put together their own plan, spending and accountability-wise, on a district-level basis. So they'll get a start at writing their district's plan. So we're kind of laying out, if you will, kind of the regimen of learning that we think will be helpful to superintendents and school administrators across the state. We also had some videos done by Mike Jacoby with the school business officials and Gary Tipsword, who's a superintendent in Central Illinois. Those two gentlemen did some tutorial videos, about 5 of those. We've put those up on our website for people to watch. They're very good in going into the mechanics of the model, so you can start to learn how the gears kind of work together in driving the model forward. So we're trying to do our business, which is education. We're trying to educate our members, and knowing that this is a dramatic shift from what they're used to, recognizing it takes a while to get your head around these types of mechanics, but we've got some really sharp people too, and we think they're picking up on it pretty quick.
I think what does moms and dads and everyone need to know, and I think you laid out some of it. One thing that strikes me is in this next year, just how much learning the school administrators and superintendents, as you just laid out, have to adjust to.
Correct.
You have not only this new funding formula, we have what used to be the federal mandate on No Child Left Behind, which is now Every Student Succeeds Act, which is known as ESSA.
Right.
And we have the evidence-based model, which I always try to put it just in layman's terms. Simply put, I think we looked around the country at best practices, and we are trying to implement what seemed to work in districts around the country in the most successful schools. Is that a short-handed way?
Actually, there was a lot of research that went into the development of the 26 elements that comprise the adequacy target. Everything's built around the adequacy target for a district. In other words, what does it cost to deliver a high-quality education to every child in every district? And you look at those districts and you say, hey, your demographics are different than mine. Our enrollment's the same, but our demographics are different. So those districts that have a higher population of EL children, higher poverty counts, more special education children, even though they may have the same enrollment as a peer district, their adequacy target's going to be higher because it takes more investment, more dollars to reach those particular children than it would children that are not in those categories of demographics. So I think that you're going to see a lot of learning this year by superintendents, but you're also going to see them start to really make detailed plans about how they're going to apply those new dollars that are coming out of core research, how they're going to apply those dollars and to make it academic gains for kids. If you look at the original researchers on this, Alan Odden and Larry Pikus, from the University of Wisconsin and the University of Southern California, they really worked hard around the adequacy target. In Illinois, we added to that in developing the local capacity target, the base funding minimum, and then that tier distribution that really ensures that the new investment by the state is going to those schools that actually needed it the most, instead of just kind of throwing it out there and whoever gets it gets it. This distribution is a really unique, robust part of the model.
Let me ask a couple of quick questions, because we could obviously talk for hours. There's so many different aspects, and we won't do that. But isn't there something in that legislation where there's a review process at some point where you say, okay, now that we've done it for, I don't know when, that's another question. When is that review triggered? Is it at the end of 1 year, at 2 years, 3 years? Where do you say, okay, now that we've implemented this, here's what's working, here's what needs to change?
Right. There's a 5-year mark in the legislation. It's called a professional judgment panel. It's comprised of a broad group of people, not only in the education sector or sphere, but also in the legislature, combined to come together and make a professional judgment panel. At the 5-year mark, they're going to give a review and a report of, hey, here's what's working well, here's what needs changed. One of my goals is by that point to make sure our districts have implemented the evidence-based model correctly. They've taken those new dollars. They've actually done some of those 26 elements. They've charted student achievement. They've looked at graduation rates, and they can say at that point, hopefully, we're moving student academic achievement. We're moving graduation rates because we're implementing these particular elements of the model. In those elements, they have, based on the research, there's an effect size. There's a return on investment calculation as to what you can kind of expect for $1 invested what's your return on that dollar. That's in the research world, that's called effect size. So those charts are available to our members. In fact, they're on our website for some of those elements. And we're hoping that, in fact, we have superintendents call and say, hey, where's that effect size chart? I want to know which elements I get the most bang out of, and they want to start doing those first. So that's encouraging that they're starting to do that. I know superintendents today, even though the new money is not going to start flowing until really January, February, I know they've already shrunk K-3 classes because they know they have an estimate of what they're going to get, have an idea, and they've already started to pare down those K-3 classes to shrink the class size so there's more individual attention between those teachers and those kids at the early grades, which has a tremendous effect size. It's a great return on the investment.
Let me ask this. People are going to say, well, that's all fine. There's a lot of details you're covering. At the end of the day, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road, based upon what we're doing, should we as citizens of Illinois expect to see an improvement in the quality of learning that's our students? And I guess that's going to be measured by what, things like ACT scores? Or what?
I would look at college acceptance rates or credentialing for some type of employable skill. I would look at student academic achievement. I don't think student attendance is in there, but I have a feeling that when your kids are engaged and they're enjoying school and there's something there that's attractive to them, I think attendance rates get better. Tardiness goes down, absenteeism goes down. So I think that the types of things that engage children in school, that hold their attention and cause them to want to be there, I think all those markers should be tilting up at that point after we've had a time to invest and implement. And the trick here is in both investing from the state and implementing correctly from the district level. Both of those things have to occur for us to see academic gains. But absolutely, the taxpayers should see some gains.
One of the things last time we talked, and we were, the schools weren't getting funded, then they were getting partial funding. One of the things, that categorical grants weren't getting paid, things like transportation. Right. Are the school districts getting caught up on those categorical grants?
They are. So Comptroller Susanna Mendoza just Monday of this week started releasing the fourth quarter MCAT payments, mandated categoricals, things for reimbursement for things like transportation, school busing. She started releasing those payments Monday of this week to schools, so that'll get them caught up for June 30th of 17, and then she's got to start trying to catch them up for the 2017-18 year. But we've worked pretty closely with her office. They've been very transparent in trying to meet the needs of school districts. That we've given them some examples of school districts to talk to that were on the verge of financial insolvency.
So she's trying to prioritize based upon what she's hearing?
She really doesn't release one school district over another. She's looking at, does she release MCATs over other state payments based on what's happening in our world of paying bills in the education field. So, but she's been very good to work with, and we appreciate the openness of that office.
And, people, I think, understand, but just to drive it home, schools might be owed tens of millions of dollars, let's say, but they're not going to get that check in one fell swoop. I mean, because, the state is operating on a cash flow basis, and so as the cash comes in, it's prioritized, as you just mentioned, to go out. Right. When we spoke lastly, and we didn't yet have a funding bill, some schools had enough money to go the entire year if a bill hadn't been passed. Other schools, you were saying, they weren't sure if they could make it through the end of September.
Right.
Those schools that were hanging on by their fingertips, so to speak, are they now getting the cash flow they needed and expect to, that they're out of the woods financially and know that can continue to operate without interruption, or is there still any kind of a...
I wouldn't characterize them as out of the woods. They're getting two sources of cash flow. They've received 2 MCAT payments in the last 60 days. They received their third quarter and their fourth quarter within the last 60 days from FY17. They're also getting their base funding minimum. So there's enough cash coming in those cash-strapped districts to operate on a minimalist budget. They're not able to implement wide, expansive, far-reaching, student-impacting changes yet because they're truly waiting on the new tier distribution to come. So they're still, it's nip and tuck for them on cash flow. And they'll really start to emerge from the woods once the new tier distribution money starts to roll into their districts. That should come hopefully in January or February. But yeah, they're in a much safer position today than they were back in late August when you and I were talking. Literally, September 15th was the close date for some districts in Illinois.
And then lastly, with all these changes, are we done for a while? I mean, you're going to be, as we talked about, you're going to have to be updating people and educating the educators on what all this change means. What didn't you get in the funding formula or the changes that maybe you had sought? And does the education community still go to the government and say, as an example, maybe mandate relief on certain things, or are we going to kind of hold our position for a while and just let what we have sink in?
I think there's a lot to sink in. A lot has happened. You overlay the federal government's accountability plan. That's more to sink in. The thing that it will be paramount for all of us to be a part of is that annual reappropriation of money to schools and other services that support schools. So we'll always be going back to the legislature on an annual basis saying, hey, we're ready for that next budget, just like the state does every year, and lobbying for that investment into the model. There's not what we would call a continuing appropriation does not exist for the model. So we'll always have to go back and lobby for that going forward, and that's part of being able to go back and show performance, show academic gains, and encouraging them to make further investments into the model. So that would be at the top. The second thing we're looking very closely at will be the teacher shortage issue that we have in Illinois. Just 5 or 6 years ago, you might see 100 applicants for a teaching job. And now we literally have a shortage. We can't find science teachers, special education teachers, specialist teachers, just are virtually non-existent. We have a lot of border counties. I think there's something like 40 border counties, maybe more, border counties in Illinois. And those border counties are losing teachers out because of a range of things. But stability in state government has been one of them over the last 4 or 5 years. Instability in our state government. They're not sure that the pension funds are going to be paid. There's been attempts to wipe out their pensions. And these teachers are just really interested in educating kids and not fighting the bureaucracy in Springfield. So they jump the border and go somewhere else. And so we really need to calm that rhetoric down. We need to find a way to bring stability to our state government and a long-term plan to pay the pension debts that the state has accumulated over time. It's been their management for literally decades upon decades that's created the issue we have. So we need to figure out a way to pay that correctly down so there's some security in the retirement prospects for teachers. We need to attract them back to the profession. That's going to be a pressing issue as we go into the next year.
Dr. Brent Clark, I mean, we have these different organizations, yours, the administrators, the school business officials, the principals, the management side, we might say, of education. At least now I think people can get somewhat of an idea of why these organizations exist and how much work there is to be implemented, as we've discussed.
Absolutely.
Never a shortage of things to talk about. We appreciate your time. We'll follow up again, hopefully in the near future.
Thanks again, Terry. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Next, from Chicago, we attend a press conference at the University of Illinois at Chicago as State Attorney General Lisa Madigan and others discuss their push to override Governor Rauner's veto of the Student Loan Bill of Rights. This runs about 20 minutes.
Big lineup this morning, so I'm glad everybody took the time in this not so lovely weather to be with us today. Let me start by saying thank you to UIC for hosting us here today. And I want to thank all of these people who have come out for this very important issue. I'm certainly happy that throughout the legislative process, I have been able to work with an incredible group of very strong allies and supporters, and we are now working together on one very important goal, and that is to override Governor Rauner's veto of the Student Loan Bill of Rights, Senate Bill 1351. The Student Loan Bill of Rights has common sense measures to ensure that Illinois student borrowers can best manage and repay their loans. As the U.S. Department of Education continues to eliminate critical reforms for students, having a Student Loan Bill of Rights in Illinois is more important than ever. There are a number of other states that have already implemented Student Loan Bill of Rights, and I think that we need to do the same thing here in Illinois. So we're going to harness the power of all of these people and all of their organizations, and we are going to reach out to members of the Illinois legislature and tell them why we need a Student Loan Bill of Rights. So here's the big picture. Americans have an unprecedented amount of student loan debt. There are currently over 44 million Americans who hold over $1.4 trillion in student loan debt. 1 in 4 of those borrowers are behind on their payments or they've stopped paying entirely. Further, student debt disproportionately impacts women, people of color, first-generation college students, and older people. For women, it's because they take out more debt at every degree level than men. In fact, women hold nearly 65% of all outstanding student debt. Plus, women end up repaying their loans more slowly because they have less income to devote to loan payments. That's for a variety of reasons. They are oftentimes single heads of households, and they earn less money due to the gender pay gap. Black and Latino borrowers, many of whom are first-generation college students, are much more likely than white borrowers to be behind on their loan payments. First-generation college students are 2 times more likely to report being behind on their payments than borrowers whose parents have a college degree. And even older people are impacted. Student loan debt for borrowers 60 years and older has quadrupled in the last decade. Compared with younger borrowers, borrowers 65 and older are disproportionately in default, and once they're in default, they can have their Social Security payments taken away. The crushing impact of student debt on these groups of people has life-altering consequences for them and their families. As student loan debt has exploded, millions of Americans are being held back from buying a home, starting a family, launching a small business, saving for, or even being able to retire. Student debt negatively impacts them, their families, and our overall economy. So what is contributing to increased student loan debt? One of the primary drivers of student debt in this country is the for-profit college industry. More than half of borrowers who attended for-profit schools and did not get a degree are behind on their payments. Too many for-profit schools leave students worse off when they started, facing a lifetime of debt with no better prospects for getting a job. And to add injury to injury, after reviewing thousands of complaints that I have received from student borrowers, I've learned that too often loan companies do not provide the information that borrowers need to repay their loans in a financially responsible manner. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Student loan servicers, the companies that collect borrowers' monthly payments, are required to tell borrowers about repayment options. However, I've learned through my investigations that these companies typically don't tell borrowers about the most affordable repayment plans that are available, especially income-driven repayment programs. Instead of providing borrowers with appropriate counseling and information, borrowers are put into repayment plans that increase the total cost of their loan, just the opposite of what they should do. Further, I've learned that even savvy and demanding borrowers, those who have figured out how to enter income-driven repayment plans, weren't notified and given the information they needed to stay enrolled in these repayment plans. And it gets worse, because as a result of these shoddy and misleading practices, scammers fill the void with false promises to assist struggling borrowers, who then lose hundreds or thousands of dollars they could have used to pay back their loan. So while I have investigated and sued for-profit schools, the largest student loan servicer in the country, and many debt relief scam operations, I know that it is absolutely imperative that Illinois students have a Bill of Rights to require student loan servicing companies to tell the truth and provide all options when student borrowers need repayment assistance. I will continue to use the full power of my office to help students succeed in paying off their loans and realizing the benefits of their education. But I cannot do this work alone. I need your help. I need everyone to reach out to their state senators and state representatives and tell them to override the governor's veto of Senate Bill 1351. We need a student loan Bill of Rights in Illinois. Now, I would like to introduce my good friend and great supporter, Abe Scar with Illinois PIRG. Abe.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning. My name is Abe Scar. I'm the director of Illinois PIRG, and as part of a national network of state PIRGs, we were founded on college campuses over 45 years ago, so have long advocated for students in the financial marketplace, including helping to pass some of the student loan bill of rights that have passed in other states. Thank you, Attorney General Madigan, for your leadership on this and so many other important consumer issues. And it's a real treat to be up here with so many talented consumer and youth advocates today. At a time when Congress and those in leadership at the federal level are rolling back vital consumer protections, it's critical that Springfield steps up. Today, we're calling on the Illinois General Assembly to vote to override Governor Rauner's veto of the Student Loan Bill of Rights. It is unfortunate that some of our leaders in Washington are working to undermine really important consumer protections, whether that's the Department of Education, which is rolling back protections for student lenders or making it easier for-profit colleges to unscrupulously take advantage of students, or it's Congress voting to gut the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was created in the aftermath of the financial crisis. At times like these, we rely on states, the laboratories of democracy, to take the lead and protect consumers. There's no question that there are persistent and ongoing problems with the student loan industry, including in servicing. The best evidence of this is the Attorney General's investigation, but there are also other indicators. Yesterday, I went online to the CFPB Consumer Bureau's online complaint database and looked up complaints in Illinois from student lending over the last year and found that they're up a whopping 229% this year compared to last year. So again, at a time when some in Washington are working to undermine these vital consumer protections, we call on the Illinois General Assembly to vote to override Governor Rauner's veto of the Student Loan Bill of Rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe. Abe, as he said, has been doing tremendous work, not just here in Illinois, but PIRG has been working throughout the country to make sure we are passing the Student Loan Bill of Rights in other states. Currently, there are 3 other states that have these bills of rights for students, and in addition, there are 6 other states that are working to pass these, in large part because of the fact that we are seeing a complete abandonment of student loan borrowers at the federal level. Next up, let me bring up another dear friend and great advocate, William McNary, who is the co-director of Citizen Action.
Well, good morning. My name is William McNary, MC capital N-A-R-Y, and I'm the co-director of Citizen Action Illinois, and I'm proud to join General Madigan and these fine advocates to call on the legislature to override Governor Rauner's veto of the Illinois Student Bill of Rights, which is a bill that was designed to protect young people from predatory and abusive student loan practices. This bill, if enacted, would prevent Illinois consumers from being steered into plans that would increase their debt instead of being told about affordable, less expensive payment options. This bill is particularly important right now that President Trump and his Education Secretary DeVos have rolled back student loan protections that were put in place by the former President Obama. Citizen Action looks forward to working with the General and these fine advocates to protect and grow the assets of these students who have studied hard and played by the rules, yet struggle to make ends meet. Students need the protection from a student loan ombudsman to lessen their access to unfair and harmful and deceptive and abusive practices of this industry. As the General said, other states have moved on this, California, Connecticut, D.C. It's time for us to move here in Illinois, too. Attorney General Madigan's vigorous pursuit and convictions against financial predators has gained her a well-deserved national reputation. And the Student Loan Bill of Rights will give her an important tool to help young people navigate a confusing and costly college loan system. Lastly, the late Senator Paul Wellstone once said, politics is not just about power. Politics is not about money. Politics is not about winning for winning's sake. Politics is about the improvement of everyday people's lives. It is time for us to protect and grow the assets of these students who studied hard, who played by the rules, yet struggle to make ends meet. We urge the legislature to override Governor Rauner's cruel veto so our students can start moving from debt devastation to asset accumulation. And lastly, thank you, General Madigan, for your strong national leadership, for your effective advocacy, and for bringing us together for this most important cause.
Okay, William McNary's the best. Next up, though, another fine friend and great fighter over the long course, over the long haul, Brent Adams, who is now serving as the Senior Vice President of Policy for the Woodstock Institute. Brent.
So I get to follow the best. Thank you. Good morning. I am Brent Adams. I am the Senior Vice President of Policy for Woodstock Institute. I'm also the former Secretary of Financial and Professional Regulation, which is the state agency that would be charged to regulate this industry if this bill becomes law. Woodstock strives to make our financial system more fair and inclusive, particularly for lower income people and people of color. Woodstock is proud to support the override of the governor's veto of SB 1351. I have been paying back my student loans for about 20 years, and I still owe, as of this very morning, $34,868.79. I affectionately refer to my student loan debt as my summer home, because the payment in terms of its size and longevity is tantamount to a home mortgage. Unlike many students, after graduation, I was blessed with job opportunities and a loan repayment assistance program offered to me by my law school that have enabled me to remain current on my student loans and to maintain a relatively stable financial existence. This is not true for far too many students who have hardly begun to embark on their adult lives and professional careers only to find themselves crushed under the weight of massive student loan debt. As the former Secretary of IDFPR, I am especially enthusiastic about the bill's provisions that would establish licensing for student loan servicers. I was secretary during the mortgage crisis, and the regulatory tools available to the state at that time enabled us to uncover deplorable deficiencies